Do you need a bucket?
Welcome to Third Side, where we've fixed all the technical difficulties from last week, hopefully. I'm joined here by my guest, Jared McGee. How you doing, Jared?
Doing good, doing good.
Amazing,
Glad to be
amazing.
here.
All right. What are we talking about this week?
Well, we're going to be talking about how mental states and emotions affect success or failure.
And who's our guest?
That would be Jessie
Right.
Twain.
Welcome, Jessie.
Hey, nice to be
right,
here.
awesome.
Thank you for having me.
Let's see how this one's a little smoother than last week, huh? Great. So,
Yeah.
First off, we're going to talk about success and failure and emotional states and mental states. How do you define success and failure?
Well, I mean, there are so many different ways in which success can be measured. So, John might have a job that pays the most money, and Jared might have the most Facebook friends, and I might live the longest of the three of us. I mean, three different ways that are all valid of
Right.
measuring success. I think to take the subjectivity out of it, what you really want to look at is a certain degree of consistency within a person's life. If somebody's jumping from job to job, it's because they don't like their job. They're not happy there. So that's not successful. If somebody stays at a job for 20 years doing the same thing and they seem happy with it, it might not be the best paying job, but it's making them happy, obviously, or they wouldn't still be there. So I think just looking at the level of consistency in a person's life will tell you something. And I don't want to rule out, because variety is the spice of life too. And I as I'm talking about consistency, I kind of imagine people saying, "Oh, but wait." So variety being the spice of life, there's still a way you can have consistency and variety. So, like, say you're not the marrying kind, right? And you want to date a lot of women. Well, if you're consistently having short-term, meaningful relationships that end with you being friends with the woman, that's another way to be successful. It's consistent, even though it doesn't look consistent from an outside perspective. Hopefully that makes
absolutely.
sense.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
definitely. And the other thing is to keep in mind is there's varying degrees within each, because sometimes if your goal really is to move from one position to another and you're successful at it, I mean, it's kind of hard to make any blanket statement one way or the other.
Oh yeah, sure. And of course, as you go through life, your priorities change and your interests change, and you come across things that you never knew you would be into, and now you're into them. So I don't want to say that success doesn't mean boring. I guess is what I really want to drive home. It's success means you have no problem saying yes to the same things because you like them. You have no problem saying no to the same things because that's not your thing.
Right. And another thing, too, I think is, a lot about success and failure. It comes into perspective. Like what we might deem successful, another might say that's failure. That's nothing to me. So I guess it all comes down to a personal thing about success and failure too, how you feel about it, because somebody might be, like you said, fine at that job for 30 years that we find tedious and monotonous. So I guess it's all down to perspective.
It depends on your goals. It depends on your approach. Because, I mean, from personal experience, I've done the moving from job to job, probably more than I should have. But at the end of the day, I wasn't happy where I was, and I was consistently moving towards something. And then once I found it, I've stayed so far.
So Jessie, let me ask you how. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, and oh no, you interrupted. Now I've lost.
You said
thought.
"and." Does that help?
I know, and now I've lost.
Well,
it.
how important is your mental and emotional stability in terms of your success and failure? How important is it?
Well, I mean, I'm sure we can all think of the artist who's suffers from depression, or the comedian. He's coming to mind now, the one that committed suicide. Robin Williams, right? So obviously not a very good mental state that he was in, and yet hugely successful, amazingly talented, one of my favorite comedians of all time. So I mean, there are those. So you can say that you don't need to be in a healthy mental state in order to be successful. But I think those are probably the exception. I think for the most part, the people who are able to identify what they want to do and put the time in to get good at it, and not yield to the whims of other people telling them what they should or shouldn't like, I think that takes a very strong mental state. So I think it generally is something important, and I think the exceptions that stand out kind of detract from that a little bit more than they should.
Yeah, and it's not always a matter of overcoming everyone, because it could be an ongoing process. So coping is just a huge mechanism. I mean, taking with Robin Williams, for example, that was, depression is something that can never be overcome. So success in his case could be maintaining it for as long as you possibly can. And I mean, unfortunately, in his case, in the end, the depression won. But so there's different end games and different mechanisms that need to be considered for something like that. But it's both really important to recognize and important to employ.
Yeah, I mean, you need to know your own strengths and weaknesses, and you need to adjust however you have to adjust. I mean, for some people, it's going to mean you need to go on medication, you need to go to therapy on a regular basis. For other people, they'll be able to just, diet and exercise or whatever, and modifying their home life in such a way that they have the privacy they need, or they have the social support group that they need. We are our own gods, so it's up to us to figure out what it is we need to be healthy and make sure that happens, because nobody's going to take care of you like you'll take care of yourself.
That's the truth.
Right.
So,
Jesse,
how do you feel your mental and emotional states? I mean, because you're an expert dabbler in psychology, you know this stuff. So, how do your mental and emotional states change, like, when applied to jobs or relationships, or do they stay the same, or do they change depending on the scenario?
Well, I mean, I at this point I can really only speak for myself. I have noticed that who I'm around can really make an impact on how I feel. Well, not so much the mood of the person that I'm around can impact my mood. And so if it's somebody who's generally rather cranky, I kind of have to go out of my way to not let them be cranky around me, because that'll just spoil my day, and who needs that? Whereas, if I find somebody who's generally cheerful, I can do whatever I have to do to try to be around them more.
Yeah. Well, part of controlling your environment, and one of the
Exactly.
keys, the key factors in lesser magic. We always like to think of it as, the way we portray ourselves, but we also need to be aware of the way the world is impacting us. So I would associate those two, and I think when people think about that in both directions, incoming and outgoing, then it can actually give you a stronger grasp on your scenario and help make some positive steps.
Yeah, and another aspect of that is there are kind of two good ways of thinking. There are two bad ways of thinking about things. So one would be anxiety over the future, where you're thinking about problems that haven't even happened yet and getting yourself all worked up, and they may not even happen. And then there's depression over the past, where you're thinking about how you mishandled something and you can't fix it now because it's in the past. It already happened and there's no point dwelling on it, but you do anyway. Those are the bad ways of thinking. The good ways of thinking are first to be very present in the moment you're in and just experiencing what's happening now and just focusing on that. And that tends to be, unless somebody's like pointing a gun at you or something like that, that tends to be rather low stress, because in the moment, you can pretty much handle whatever's happening in the moment. And the other good way of thinking is much more long term, where you're actually thinking 10 years or 20 years, maybe even 30 years out, depending on your age. And you're looking at the problems you're facing today in terms of, okay, 10 years from now, is this even going to matter? Or, 10 years from now, this person that's annoying me right now, won't it be better if I just kind of suck it up and be nice to them and get a raise out of the job or something like that? It really helps you focus on what matters, to think in the future, and it helps you stay calm to be in the present.
Yeah, definitely. And like you were saying, you touched on something earlier and it kind of made me think of it. I've always had problems speaking in public. I don't know if you could tell. I'm like, bitty. But, and you get to that point where there's this anxiety and there's this stress that's on there because of it. But you're going to get through it. You're going to get to that point. Your time is going to pass and you're going to get to that point of being finished with it or completed with it. So you might as well give it your best shot. You might as well go for it. So it's good to keep that strong mental state, or just remembering that little thing to help you through it. So,
yeah.
Well, worrying, they say worrying is like paying a bill you might not owe.
That's good.
So it's important to remember that it's important to analyze, because there's worrying to keep yourself safe. There's about your surroundings physically, like texting and driving. You need to worry about that. There's worrying about things that might not even happen, and it's important to recognize the difference, because in some senses it is good to do it, and in others it's not. I've personally used the phrase often that if freaking out will help the scenario, I'll be the first to do it. Because people always ask me, why. Ever since I was a kid, I've always remained calm, and honestly, if losing my cool would help, I'd do it, but it often doesn't. So I try to just really break the problem down into smaller, more manageable things, and take them on one at a time until they're all done.
Well, I wish I could be as calm as you. I'm terrible at that. The first sign of a crisis, I'm in panic mode. I don't know why, just it happens. But I wanted to go back to what John brought up about public speaking, because as it happens, earlier today, I was looking for a file on my computer, and I came across a recording I did for 9 cents. It was the first time I did my I Dream of Jessie segment live and actually read it. And my voice was just trembling, and I was talking like a mile a minute, and you could just tell I was so nervous doing it. And I don't think there's anything I could have done at that time to be calmer. It was performance anxiety, and some things you just kind of need to do over and over and get better at them. Yeah. And like right now, I'm still nervous, but I know I don't sound it because I'm nowhere near nervous like I was back then. And I'm so glad that I've pushed myself to do live recordings with Adam, because I wouldn't be doing this now if I hadn't done that then. Sometimes it really is a matter of just pushing yourself out of your comfort zone.
And practice makes perfect. So let me ask you, this. How do other people's mental stability or lack thereof affect your success or failure? How do they have an impact on you?
Well, I mean, obviously, like if you work for somebody who's nuts, that's how far can your career really get? If you've got people in your family who are drug addicts, that's going to impact your life. And, honestly, I'm not sure. I don't think I know of anybody who doesn't have within their extended family either a drunk or a drug addict. I think just about everybody I know faces that in one realm or the other. And yet it's that those kind of pressures, when the other person is not in control and they're not in a good place and there's really nothing you can do about it, I'm not sure what the best coping mechanism is.
It's hard to say one way or the other. I mean,
Yeah.
and the other thing is, it's even harder to come up with an end all be all response to something like that, because every scenario is going to be different in some way. So,
Yes.
I mean, at the end of the day, you've got to have some sort of system of evaluation that that works for you. But then, even more importantly than just having the evaluation system is admitting the reality of it. So if you've got the system that's working for you for analyzing your own scenario, good and bad, you have to have the courage to be honest with yourself and admit sometimes it's just not right. There's got to be a change made, and change is always uncomfortable.
Yeah, I mean, it could be, you've got some uncle who's been drunk his whole life and he's on his deathbed and he'll be gone soon anyway. Or it could be you've got a 13-year-old niece who's just started using heroin. And those are two wildly different situations, neither of which would you really have any control over. And yet, at the end of the day, it doesn't do you any good to be a martyr. It doesn't do you any good to waste your whole life fretting over this person that you may not be able to help in any way, shape, or form. So, it's not like I'm saying, ignore the person and move on with your life. But in a sense, you do have to move on with your life, whether you ignore the person or not.
Yeah, that time will go by anyway. That's crazy.
Yeah.
So, I had a question here. How do you deal mentally with, how do you go on with life and continue your success when, dealing with a breakup or losing a loved one or a friend or something like that? How does that affect you? And what can be done to remedy that?
I have read, and I don't know if it's true or not, but I've read it, that the grieving process takes 2 months or 3 months of, where it's intense and then it starts to fade off. So when I've hit really dark periods in life, I try to remind myself that, the only thing that's constant is change. And if things are as bad as they can get now, they're bound to get better. It'll probably take a couple of months, but they will get better. And you just, check off, look at the calendar and keep marking off the days and say, okay, another one down, another one down. Things are going to get better. Things are going to get better.
A lot of people like to think of karma and things of that nature, but I've always looked at it, especially as atheists, I've always looked at it as more mathematically. The law of averages. If today is a 2 on a scale of 1 to 10, then you've got at least a 70% chance or 80% chance of it getting better. And then likewise. Yeah. So if you would rank today was a 9 out of 10, there's only a 10% chance it's going to get better. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to drop to, a 1 or a 2, but you just got to remember that in the end, it's going to all kind of balance out. And
I mean, I guess one thing that you can try to do to get through the toughest days is just stay busy, which is, I mean, if the toughest days involve depression, staying busy when you're depressed is the hardest thing in the world, because depression just makes you want to do absolutely nothing. But that's the worst thing to do. Nothing. The best thing to do is anything. So if you've got any kind of a social support network that can just get you out of the house and doing something, that'll help get you through it.
Awesome.
This is like Debbie Downer of an episode.
But it's good stuff. There's a lot, a lot of people do deal with these sort of things, and it's a real world problem. So this is good. And you're an expert and dabbler in psychology, so it works out fine.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully it's helpful.
So what about at work, group projects, when you're dealing, there's some guy or girl in that group that you just I want to, but how does one deal with something like that?
So normally if you're in a group and there's one person who's really just not with it, everybody else in the group is going to see that too. So I've been in meetings where somebody's talking and everybody else just kind of starts making eye contact and nobody's saying anything, but you can just tell.
Yeah.
Everybody's on the same page, and everybody's just kind of sitting there nodding like, okay. And at that point, once you know you've got everybody, then you can kind of just, hey, I've got another suggestion. What if we try doing it this way? And it's like everybody will have your back.
Yeah, anything but him. Yeah,
So,
totally. Gotcha.
Yeah. And the other thing that I always like to consider when working in a group project is it's kind of that the wolf mentality of leading, following, or getting out of the way. And sometimes, especially with that, the overall alpha types that we usually are, is or at least the type that's determined, we have to sometimes recognize that someone might be better at this topic or at this task than we are. And maybe the overall big picture would look better if we do jump to second or third place. And I know that that's a challenge for a lot of us. How do you handle scenarios like that?
See, I'm fine with leading and I'm fine with following. I'm one of those people that falls right in between the two urges, if you want. If somebody else is dead set on leading, that's fine. I'll.
But what if they're bad at it?
Well, you can be a backseat driver. If somebody needs to be the driver, but they don't know what they're doing, you can be the backseat driver that, as long as they've got some way of making it look like it was their idea, they'll go with what you say if it makes sense.
Definitely backseat driving. That's probably more challenging than driving from the front seat, because now you've got that extra factor of having someone else that you've got to bend to your will.
Yeah, you've got to get them alone. You've got to put the idea in their ear, and then you've got to let them come out with it in front of other people like it was their own. And I don't, it's the credit part. I don't care about that so much. It's more the effort of going through and arranging the scenarios so that they will present your idea as their own. It's just like, it's a pain in the ass. You want to just be able to say, look, here's a better way to do it. Let's do it.
Yeah.
But you can't always.
Gregory asked a good question. Have you ever found a way to channel the mental weight of depression into creative endeavors that have succeeded in breaking you out of depression?
Never. I totally envy people who can do that. With me, depression it's shut down.
What a great question, though. And it's like, nope, never, nope.
Nope.
I know. I wish I had a better answer.
I was wondering if
that was an honest one.
I was wondering if how the definition of success or failure might change from generation to generation. What was successful back then might not be considered successful now, and vice versa. So, what do you think about that?
Yeah. So, your culture is going to shape the way you measure success. There's some parts of the world where success is just surviving to your 18th birthday for some people. I'm thinking like my parents' generation or my grandparents' generation, just being able to raise your kids and keep a roof over their house might have been enough. Or for the next generation, it might be, we managed to get one of our kids to college. And then the next generation, it's like, okay, well, now we need to not only get them through college, but they need to come out doctors and lawyers or something like that, because there's more money involved. And also, it's not even just the culture of the time, but it's also who you're surrounded with. If you're in a neighborhood where everybody's kids are becoming doctors and lawyers, then that's going to put the pressure on you to have doctors and lawyers out of your own children. Whereas if the people around you, half of them don't even work, they're on welfare or something like that, you may not even have pressure to get a job. So culture plays in heavily in what defines in the specific, not contradicting what I said earlier about the consistency being the sort of overall way to judge it, but in the specific ways that you will measure your own success, your culture plays in hugely with that.
The other thing to keep in mind is there are factors in this that are beyond our control. Economic, factors. If something is happening, if inflation is on a rise to a point that is negating all of your paycheck because most of it is being eaten up now that gas is, $5 instead of $2, and things of that nature. Regardless of everyone's opinion one way or the other on it, the fact that it's happening is a reality and is a new thing to deal with. So, I mean, housing markets go up. All of a sudden, your taxes go up, and now the house you had, you can't afford it anymore, or rent is going up. I mean, there's numerous things that can be taken into consider, and will challenge your success.
And in that case, it's actually almost fortunate that our way of measuring success is so tied to our culture, because let's say there's an economic depression, some big company moves out and lots of people lose their jobs that live near you. Well, now the economic downturn is like normal for your neighborhood, so you're not the only one who, it used to be 2 adults working, now there's only 1. A lot of people are in that boat, and so it doesn't seem as much like a personal failure, if you get what I'm saying. So I think that actually provides a bit of a cushion when it's a large external force that's causing it, is you don't have to, nobody feels like they have to internalize it because so many people are affected. We're all in this boat together.
Exactly. So how do you feel about the culture now where it's considered highly successful that you've coddled your child so much that it can't go to school because it's feeling bad because Trump got elected?
Oh God, I just want to smack those people. I don't know whether I want to smack the kids first or the parents. Or Trump. I don't like him either. I'll smack them all.
Smack everybody.
Let me get out of my safe space so I can chime in on this.
That's great. What do you feel about gender? Does gender play a role in what's considered successful or a failure, and how does that change?
Oh, sure. I mean, it seems like it's changing, but it hasn't. There's still, men are still the ones who are supposed to provide, protect. What's the third P? Provide, protect.
Eat. Oh,
perform.
Sorry.
That's it. I had
I thought it was eat.
Yeah, that too. There's not as much pressure on women to do that. There never has been. But there's an enormous amount of pressure on women to not age, which is impossible. I mean, as difficult as it might be to provide, protect, and perform, it's at least possible.
Yeah.
The standards for women, and it's I don't see it going away anytime soon, is, still the richest women in the world are still judged by how they look when they're 70, it's
Yep. Can we talk here? Yeah, definitely.
I mean, if there's, I don't think I can come up with a better case for not allowing society to tell you what is successful.
Yeah. Eric has a good question here. What would you recommend for someone who is career-driven and goal-oriented and knows what they want but has to start over? What would you say the best way to rebuild and see the bigger picture is? Good one, Eric.
The first thing to keep in mind is that the emotions you feel tend to keep you in one place. We're naturally driven to succeed, but we're also naturally cautious about taking any risks. Our emotions will keep us in our comfort zone if we let them. So if you have a drive to do something else, first understand that you're going to be uncomfortable and you're going to be nervous and it's going to be difficult because you're pushing yourself out of a comfort zone. And that's a very healthy thing to do, and it's the right thing to do. It's just, you got to know going in, this isn't going to feel good. It's not going to feel good for a very long time. And so you kind of need to prepare yourself that the mental state isn't going to be a comfortable one, and then be able to set aside, okay, here's what I want to do, here's the steps that are going to get me there, and kind of logically follow the steps while giving the emotions a backseat. And good luck with that if that's what you're trying to do.
Exactly. That's awesome. This will be a good time to take a short little commercial break and run the sponsors of the show to run the commercials here real quick. And we'll be right back with that, everyone. 1 second.
Hi, this is Magister Robert Johnson. I'm the author of The Satanic Warlock, a book you probably heard quite a bit about. We've had unprecedented success with this book, and warlocks throughout the world are clamoring for more and more information. The book is just the beginning. The book is just the jumping off point, a primer, so to speak, for warlocks all over the world to gain knowledge, magical knowledge, satanic knowledge. The Satanic Warlock website, which will premiere probably within the next couple of months, is going to offer the next level of information. We will expand upon all areas, including power and seduction and just what it means to be a man in this post-politically correct era that we're now living in. This book was just the beginning. So jump on over to the satanicwarlock.com, sign up for the new information, and to be one of the first to join the website. You won't be disappointed.
All right. We're back. Yeah,
We're
that was good. I
back.
had to get a little stretch in. Tip my toe to jacuzzi, baby.
Yep.
All right.
Exactly. All right, Jesse. So knowing yourself and its importance to success. What would you say about, for example, like an introvert applying for an outside sales job? How important is it to really know yourself and your capabilities?
Yeah, that's hugely important because, I mean, that example, an introvert going for an outside sales job, that's somebody who's like setting themselves up for misery.
Mhm.
So, like, I'm an introvert.
No.
And doing these kind of podcasts, yeah, and doing these kind of podcast things, being an introvert doesn't work with that. But I'm also I've been like swapping between my true self and my demonic back and forth for so long that it just happens rather easily and naturally and quickly, and I can bounce back and forth without any problem. I imagine there are a number of other witches and warlocks who can do the same. So when I go to do podcasting, simply switch to demonic mode. But that's not something, I mean, it's your true self is still your true self. And I couldn't do this 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. That would just be impossible. I'd be exhausted and I'd be miserable. So you do need to understand, there's fake it until you make it, but you can't fake your true personality. And so, something like being an introvert or something like being an extrovert and going to work in a place where nobody talks to each other, that would just drive a person nuts as well. You can, like, I can do extroverted things so long as I'm not forced to do them for very long or very often. And I think anybody with whatever your particular strength or weakness is, so long as you're not working against yourself for extended periods of time or have to rely on it in key crux moments, you should be fine. Just don't forget what your strengths and weaknesses are.
So
Challenging yourself
is
versus
it important
overreaching.
to, I guess, set up some kind of self-assessment thing and constantly, remind yourself or question yourself and your methods and your modes and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, so much of lesser magic involves knowing yourself. Probably a good bit of greater magic involves knowing yourself. That can't be emphasized enough. I mean, you really need to understand who you are if you're going to be your own god and succeed in your own world and create your own reality. It's just, that's at the heart of it.
So you mentioned lesser magic, and this is a big part of it. Do you think like changing your personal appearance, to change, changes your mentality?
Oh yeah, absolutely. The people will say dress for success, dress like the job you want to have. That not only projects things outward, but you look at yourself a certain way. You walk differently when you're dressed, in a suit and tie or a dress and heels versus, sneakers and sweatpants or whatever. And, if maybe this is more a girl thing than a guy thing, I don't know, but when you know you look good, you're more on your game. So, doing your hair, doing your makeup and all that, it can have a huge impact on how you perform during the day.
And that kind of ties into Nornan's question. What are your feelings on working culture where, while having equal rights, a lot of women still hold on to the concept that the man should be, where to go? The man should be the breadwinner.
I think that's part of our DNA. I am actually one of the people. It's not that I hold that view, because actually I make more than my husband, and we're fine. But I can understand easily women who get a little stressed out if their husband doesn't make as much as they do. I've seen men get stressed out if their wives make more than they do. I think it's part of being human. Is the man is the one who's supposed to perform, provide, and protect, not the woman. And so you're always going to have that double standard. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I mean, if that's who we are, then we should be living with rules based on who we are, not rules based on some pie in the sky desire for ultimate equality.
That's good. 1 second. Yeah, this is great. Grigori asked this too. I wanted to see the answer to this because this sounds interesting. He said, "Can you speak to a specific way in which optimism has aided in personal success?"
There have been times when I don't know if this would count as optimism, but there have been times when I'm looking to do something and it's scary. It's it's definitely outside the comfort zone. And so I'll just kind of tell myself, what's the worst that can happen? And if I just ask that question and I can't come up with, somebody dying or something like that, it's like, fuck it, just go for it. Just do it. And I've done this enough times that I can look back at them and say, yeah, I did that, nothing bad happened. I did that, nothing bad happened. I did that one and something bad happened, but you know what? Everybody forgot about it within a day. Just go for it.
Go for it, Grigori.
The fear of failure that speaks to the fear of failure. I mean, you can't be so afraid of failure that you never try, because what's the old saying? You miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if that really counts as optimism. I might be kind of cheating the question there, but hopefully it helps.
So is there ever a point in which you're satisfied with your results of being successful? Or is it a constant, I can't get enough type of thing? Is it insatiable?
Yeah, it would be great if you could ever reach a point in life and say, okay, this was what I wanted. Yeah. I'm done. Kick back, relax, get that lawn chair out by the pool with a little Mai Tai. I don't know of anybody who's ever done that, though. It seems like no matter what we do, we always want just a little bit more. And I think that's also part of who we are.
It puts an interesting focus on retirement, because once you reach the point where you don't want to do it anymore, can you live with what you've done up until that point? Was it enough, or do you end up wishing you had more?
Well, retirement's an interesting thing, because there's people who they hate their jobs, and so they look forward to retirement. And it's like, okay, if you spent your whole life doing something you hate, what are the odds that in your last few years you're going to be able to come up with something that you love? I think that's a losing proposition. And then there are other people who absolutely love what they do for a living, and they don't want to retire, or maybe they put off their retirement until they're physically unable to do it anymore. And I think that puts you in a much better place, where you're already in the habit of doing what you love, and I think that you'll retire better there. So, if you're working towards retirement and hating what you're doing, don't count on retirement making it any better.
Yeah, it almost sounds like a pattern there, huh?
Yeah. Again, going back to the whole consistency thing, how you live in your life.
So we touched on it earlier. You mentioned something about it in the beginning of the show. Mental issues such as ADD, depression, and things like that. How do you cope with those types of things, or people that have those types of things when you're into your goal setting mode?
Well, okay, so if it's somebody else that's close to you that has these kind of issues, then you've always got to allow for a bit of slack in your planning, because they might one day be able to come with you on your journey, and at another day they're just going to hold you back. And depending on your relationship, it might be worth being held back because you really want the person in your life, or it might be a time to kind of look at that relationship and say, is this healthy for me to be here? Should I move on? If it's yourself that's got the mental issue, then you need to put slack for that into your planning. You need to know that you can't choose the mental equipment you were born with. And I'm probably good for one good bout of depression a year. Doesn't always hit the same time of year, but once a year I'll hit something that'll just stop me in my tracks. And so, if I'm trying to plan something where this month, January, I'm going to do this, February, I'm going to do this, March, I'm going to do this, I need to kind of give myself a month off somewhere in there and be able to space it wherever the depression hits, so that I can still be on my plan.
Yeah.
Because I have no control over this brain. This brain is what it is.
You incorporate it.
Yeah.
Awesome. So let's close it up here with one of these things, every one of these last questions here. Steps, success in steps, breaking down like a larger goal into smaller steps versus the eye on the prize. What are some of the things that people can do to help themselves become more successful?
Well, I absolutely love breaking down goals into steps, because that allows you to have a really wild, pie in the sky kind of goal that, you can, I'm going to be president of the United States, or whatever it is. It's on the face of it, it looks impossible, but then you start breaking it down. And it's like, okay, I can start a petition and get my name out there, and I can run for mayor, and if I can lobby these people. There are things you can do to work towards it. And the great thing about that is, if you are consistently working towards a pie in the sky goal, even if you don't reach that goal, you're probably going to end up in a better place that's more like what you want anyway. So it almost doesn't matter what the goal is. You just want the goal to be something that really inspires you and will really get you moving. And then you make the steps very concrete and very small, so that they're doable, so that they're doable and you don't get freaked out and overwhelmed by them. And you just keep moving yourself closer and closer to the life you want to have.
Great.
Makes sense to me.
So that's great. That was a great show. We've got another question there. What do you think, Jared? Do you want to ask that? We got a little subtopic of something off shooting the show type of thing. So we just wanted your take on it, because I think it would be pretty interesting to hear your answer.
It's an important one. Are you ready, Jessie?
I'm ready.
Which movie psychopath would you date and why? Hannibal Lecter, Norman Bates, or Kathy Bates, as in from Misery?
I'd have to go with Norman, just because I don't do chicks.
Hannibal Lecter is a guy.
Apparently I do cross-dressers, but I don't do chicks.
So Norman Bates, simply because he's the only guy. Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
Act like his mom, you'll be
That's
fine.
awesome. Well, any closing thoughts?
No, but I do want to give a shout out to my friends in the Satanic Player Society who have been online and kind of cheering me on.
Awesome.
Appreciate it.
All right.
All right.
Till next time, everyone. Hail Satan.
Hail Satan.
Hail Satan.